The stranger in the hoodie. It was a gray afternoon in a small American town called Weston Creek, a place where everyone thought they knew everyone. The streets were quiet, the air smelled faintly of rain, and old buildings stood like stubborn memories of a simpler time. A diner sat at the corner of Elm and 7th, the kind of place where gossip traveled faster than coffee poured. Inside, a waitress named Lucy wiped down tables while the radio played soft country tunes. Across from her, a sheriff's patrol car cruised slowly past the window, the driver nodding as he checked for anything out of place. Keanu Reeves, dressed in a plain hoodie and jeans, walked into town unnoticed. He kept his head low, not because he was ashamed or scared, but because he wanted peace. He had driven through the night, chasing solitude, and this small town looked quiet enough to disappear into. He didn't look like a movie star. He looked like a tired man with something heavy on his mind. As he approached the local park, he passed by a group of children playing near the swings. A mother sitting on a bench smiled at him, and he smiled back. It was genuine, soft, and warm, yet not far from that scene. Another set of eyes was watching him with suspicion. Officer Rick Dalton had worked in Weston Creek for 17 years. He considered himself the protector of normal life. But under that badge beat a heart full of prejudice, quiet and disguised, yet waiting for an excuse. When he saw a man in a hoodie, head down, hands in his pockets, walking near the playground, his instincts flared. Rick's hand reached for the radio, but he stopped. Instead, he pulled his patrol car to the side of the road and stepped out, hand already hovering near his holster. Keanu sat on a bench, taking in the peaceful silence, unaware of what was about to unfold. Rick walked over with heavy boots and a rehearsed authority. "You lost, buddy?" he asked, his voice laced with something unspoken. Keanu looked up, calm, but his eyes showed surprise. "Just resting," he said. Rick squinted. "We don't get many strangers around here dressed like that. Mind showing me some ID?" Keanu nodded, reached slowly into his back pocket, and handed him a worn wallet. But before the officer even opened it, his suspicion deepened. Maybe it was the way Keanu spoke. Maybe it was something else. Rick held the wallet in one hand and unclicked the safety on his holstered pistol with the other. "Stand up. Hands where I can see them." Children stopped playing. A woman gasped. The park was no longer peaceful. Keanu stood slowly, raising his hands. "Officer," he said in a low voice, "I don't want any trouble." But Rick had already drawn his gun. "Get down on your knees." The moment froze like ice. A phone camera in the distance began recording. The mother on the bench grabbed her child and backed away. Whispers turned into murmurs. "I think you're making a mistake," Keanu said. "I'm just a traveler passing through." Rick's hand shook slightly. "Don't move." Keanu knelt, calm and careful. He didn't shout. He didn't resist. But his eyes locked on Rick's, full of something that disarmed the officer more than any weapon ever could. Dignity. Then came a voice from behind the crowd. "That's Keanu Reeves." People began to whisper louder now. Others pulled out phones. One teenage boy said, "Mom, that's the guy from The Matrix." Rick blinked, his face pale. For a moment, confusion replaced his rage. "What?" The mother on the bench stepped forward. "He's an actor. A good man. He helped build a children's hospital in California, and you've got a gun pointed at him." Rick lowered his weapon slowly, his hand trembling. I didn't know." Keanu stood, dusting off his jeans, his voice still even. "You didn't care to ask. That's the problem." Rick's mouth opened, but no words came out. A town that had always looked the other way was suddenly awake. "You think this is okay?" asked a voice from the crowd. A man in a business suit, tall and serious, stepped forward. "I'm with the state attorney's office, and I saw everything." Rick's eyes widened. "Wait, no, The man raised his hand. "You just pointed a gun at an unarmed man sitting peacefully in a public park. You didn't check the ID. You didn't have probable cause, and now your badge is about to be reviewed." Rick looked around, But the crowd wasn't with him anymore. Every phone, every stare, every whisper was now a mirror showing him who he really was. Keanu said nothing more. He just picked up his wallet and walked away, back toward the diner. Inside, Lucy the waitress saw him come in. "Can I help you?" "Just coffee?" he said with a tired smile. As he sat, the door opened again. A young man came in and sat at the next table. "You handled that with grace," the man said softly. Keanu looked over. "I've had practice." The man leaned in. "But the story's not over. That cop's brother is the chief." Keanu raised. His cup took a sip and said, "Then we'd better make sure the truth doesn't get buried." And just like that, the calm was gone. What started as a quiet walk in a small town had become something bigger. A test of justice, a fight against buried prejudice, and a moment the town would never forget. The screen fades to black as Keanu's eyes scan the window. Outside, patrol. Cars gather. Tension rises. Something is coming. Cliffhanger. A woman walks into the diner, breathless, holding her phone. "Mr. Reeves, you need to see this." They're already spinning the story on the news. They're saying you threatened the cop. Keanu lowers his cup slowly. Then it's time they hear the truth. The video goes viral as the sun dipped behind the hills of Weston Creek. The diner lights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the red vinyl booths and polished counter. Keanu Reeves sat quietly in a corner, his coffee untouched now, his mind not on caffeine but on the whirlwind beginning to stir outside. The woman who had rushed in, Mary, she'd said her name was, now stood beside him, her phone screen glowing, with a news anchor's voice echoing from a national broadcast. "Breaking news from Weston Creek," the anchor reported. "A local police officer claims he was forced to draw his weapon after a suspicious man refused to comply in a public park. The man, reportedly agitated and uncooperative, was later identified as actor Keanu Reeves." Mary's fingers trembled as she paused the video. "They're painting you as the threat," she said, "and people are already picking sides." Keanu's eyes remained steady, focused not on fear or anger, but something deeper. Disappointment, a familiar one. He had lived through whispers and judgment, had seen fame both shield and strip a person. And now, in a quiet town, the truth was already being rewritten by louder voices. He stood slowly. "Do you have the raw video?" he asked. Mary nodded, handing him the phone. The footage she recorded was clear. It showed Rick Dalton's hand trembling as he aimed a gun at a man who had done nothing but sit quietly. It showed Keanu kneeling, speaking calmly. And it showed the moment when the crowd began to realize who he was. "I need your permission to share this," Keanu said softly. "Take it," she replied without hesitation. "This town needs to see what really happened." Meanwhile, across town in a small station built of brick and pride, Officer Rick Dalton sat in his office, staring blankly at his own screen. His brother, Chief David Dalton, stood behind him, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You had one job, Rick," the chief said coldly. "One quiet post in a peaceful town, and you managed to pull a gun on Keanu Reeves." Rick clenched his fists. He looked suspicious. He had that hood up. He was near kids. What was I supposed to do? Supposed to ask questions. Supposed to assess. Supposed to think, David snapped. "Instead, you drew a weapon in broad daylight on an innocent man, and now the media's all over it." Rick turned toward his brother, desperate now. "You can fix this, can't you? Say it was a misunderstanding? Spin it?" The chief's face hardened. "You don't get to be the victim here, Rick, not this time." Outside, the video began spreading, first locally, then regionally, then nationwide. Hashtags emerged. Justice for Keanu. Truth in Weston. A familiar wave of online justice gathered speed. Influencers began sharing it. Then journalists. Then celebrities. Within hours, the footage had over 5 million views. At the diner, the crowd grew. Not just customers now, but reporters, townsfolk, and strangers. Lucy, the waitress, brought Keanu another cup of coffee, her voice low and worried. I heard the mayor's asking questions now, she whispered, and people are saying the department might cover this up. Keanu leaned back. Then let's make sure they can't. Mary sat beside him, unlocking her social media and streaming live. Say something. The world's watching now. Keanu hesitated. He had never liked speaking for the sake of noise, but this wasn't about noise. This was about something deeper, something broken, something that needed healing. He leaned toward the phone and began to speak. Hello, everyone. My name is Keanu Reeves. Earlier today, I walked into your town just looking for peace. I sat on a park bench. I smiled at a mother and her children, and I was met with a gun held by a man who didn't ask me who I was or why I was there. He saw a hoodie, and he assumed the worst. He paused. The diner had fallen silent. Even the clinking of dishes stopped. This isn't just about me. This happens to people every day. People who don't have cameras recording. People who don't have names that make headlines. People who are judged not for what they do, but for what they look like. Mary's eyes filled with tears. I'm not here to fight a war. I'm here to remind us what justice should look like, what fairness means, and how we fix the places we've allowed to crack. He stopped the stream, and for a long moment no one spoke. Outside, a black SUV pulled up. A woman in a dark pantsuit stepped out. Her name was Angela Hayes, an independent civil rights lawyer from the city. She had seen the video, and she had driven through the night. Mr. Reeves, she said, walking into the diner. I'd like to offer my help, pro bono. Keanu looked at her with curiosity. You think this will go to court? If it doesn't, she said with conviction, then we've failed, not just you, but everyone watching. As they spoke, Rick Dalton stood in front of a mirror back at the station. His uniform suddenly felt like a costume. His hands trembled. Not from fear, but realization. For the first time in his life, he couldn't pretend anymore. The face in the mirror wasn't a hero. It was someone who had let his fear become power. Later that night, the town council announced an emergency meeting. Community leaders, clergy, business owners, and residents packed into the old high school auditorium. Whispers filled the room as the mayor stepped up to the microphone. We've seen the video, she began. We've heard the voices. And now we need to decide who we are as a town. Do we stand for fairness or do we look away? Keanu stood in the back of the room unnoticed, his hood still up. He didn't want applause. He didn't want revenge. He wanted truth. Then the chief walked onto the stage. He looked out over the crowd and cleared his throat. I have placed Officer Rick Dalton on immediate unpaid suspension pending investigation, he said. I know some of you are angry. Some are ashamed. So am I. The room grew quiet. But this is our chance to grow. Not just punish, but learn. Outside the building, a group of young teens lit candles along the sidewalk. They held signs that read, Truth Matters and Be Better, Weston Creek. As Keanu stepped outside into the cool night air, a soft voice called out behind him, Mr. Reeves. It was Lucy, the waitress. She held out a folded piece of paper. This came in for you. Someone left it at the diner. He unfolded it. The handwriting was rough, clumsy, but the words struck deep. I'm sorry, I failed. You didn't deserve that. I don't know how to fix this yet, but maybe one day I can. Rick Dalton. Keanu folded the note gently and placed it in his jacket. Sometimes, he whispered, the first step is knowing you broke something. Cliffhanger. Angela walked over, holding her phone. Her face was pale. They just issued a statement from the police union, she said. They're pushing back hard, calling you a threat. They're trying to discredit you. Keanu stared into the distance, the glow of candles reflecting in his eyes. Then let them try, he said. I'm not walking away. Beneath the badge the next morning arrived with a heavy sky hanging over Weston Creek like a curtain drawn too tight. The streets, once quiet and tucked in anonymity, now buzzed with something unfamiliar. Pressure. Trucks from news outlets parked. Along the sidewalks, reporters with hurried voices delivered updates and locals whispered in hushed tones. The town was no longer a forgotten place. It had become the center of a storm. Inside Lucy's diner, the clatter of coffee cups and silverware was drowned by the sound of televisions playing news from around the country. Almost every major network had latched onto the story. The footage was now in high rotation, and everywhere the same questions echoed. Was it racism? Was it overreach? Was the apology enough? Keanu Reeves sat quietly at a booth near the window. The weight of the moment pressed on him, not as a celebrity but as a man. He hadn't planned to be a symbol. He hadn't asked for attention. But he knew that walking away now would be a betrayal. Not of himself, but of those who lived with this kind of injustice every day without cameras, without hashtags, without anyone to listen. The door creaked open and Angela Hayes stepped in, her leather folder tucked beneath her arm. She moved with urgency, her heels clicking against the tile floor like a warning. "Keanu," she said as she sat down across from him, "we have a real problem." He looked up, calm, but alert. "Go on." "They've just released a different version of the incident," she said, unfolding her folder. "Edited footage. Cut just before the officer pulled the gun. They're claiming you resisted, that you refused to speak. They've even got a statement from someone who says you were aggressive." Keanu's brow furrowed. "Someone from the crowd?" "No," she replied, her voice tight. "An officer. Another one. Not Rick. A colleague. They're closing ranks." Keanu exhaled slowly, his eyes drifting to the people outside the window. Mothers with children, store owners unlocking their doors, people living their normal lives, unaware that truth was once again being reassembled to fit a different agenda. "Do you think the truth can survive this?" he asked softly. Angela leaned in. "Only if we make it undeniable." While they talked across town, Officer Rick Dalton sat in the basement of his brother's home, stripped of his uniform, surrounded by silence. The suspension had come fast, but the judgment came faster. He had been called a disgrace, a bigot, a fool. His face was on screens, his name in headlines, and for the first time the man who once walked with false pride now stared into the abyss of consequences. His brother, Chief David Dalton, came down the stairs holding a folder. "Rick," he said without emotion, "we need to talk." Rick didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on a blank wall as if trying to erase the memory of what he'd done. "They're building a case against you," David continued. "The mayor's office wants a full internal review. And the union? They're only backing you to protect themselves." Rick finally turned. "Why are you here?" "Because I want you to testify," the chief said bluntly. Rick laughed bitterly. "You want me to go up there and confess to the world I'm a racist?" David's expression tightened. "I want you to tell the truth, whatever that is. You owe the people that. You owe yourself that." Rick shook his head. "You think truth matters? They've already decided what kind of man I am." David stepped forward, his voice low and sharp. "And are they wrong?" Rick flinched, but didn't answer. "Then prove it," the chief said. "Not by spinning lies, not by blaming the hoodie or the skin or the silence, but by being a man for once. Because this time, Rick, there's no shield to hide behind." Back at the diner, Mary arrived again, her laptop open and a document pulled up. "Keanu," she said, sliding into the booth. "You need to see this. It's a copy of Rick's personnel record. Anonymous leak." Angela leaned over to read. Her eyes widened as she scanned the lines. "Disciplinary warnings. Use of force complaints, all sealed." Angela whispered. "They buried this." Keanu's jaw clenched, his voice quiet but firm. "How many others before me?" Mary looked at him, her eyes filled with both sorrow and determination. "Maybe too many." "We need to bring this to light," Angela said. "Not just for your case, but for every name that never made the news." Keanu nodded. "Then we do it right. We do it with truth, and patience, and no anger." Angela gave a small smile. "You really are who people say you are." Keanu looked away. "I just don't want to be who he thinks I was." That night, a town hall was called. Hundreds packed into the community center. Camera crews lined the back wall. The mayor stood, nervously on stage. And then, the chief stepped forward. "Thank you all for being here," David said. "Tonight we face something many towns never do, a mirror. And we don't always like what we see." Whispers filled the crowd. Some supportive, others skeptical. "But tonight," the chief continued, "you will hear the truth." And then the room shifted as Officer Rick Dalton walked onto the stage. A silence fell like a blanket. The man who had triggered the storm now stood before them. No badge, no gun, just a microphone and a chance. He cleared his throat. "I want to say something. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want honesty." His eyes moved across the room until they landed on Keanu, who stood quietly near the back. When I saw him sitting there, I didn't see a man. I saw a threat, not because he did anything wrong, but because of how he looked, because of how I was raised, because of the stories I believed. He paused, his voice cracking. I was wrong, dangerously wrong. A gasp rippled through the crowd, and it wasn't the first time, he continued. I've made assumptions before, pulled people over without cause, let fear steer me. I hid behind the badge, behind my brother's protection. But this time there was a camera, and this time it was someone famous. He swallowed hard, but it shouldn't take fame to be treated with respect. A tear slid down Mary's cheek. The room remained frozen. I accept whatever punishment is coming, Rick finished. But if this means anything, let it mean that no one is above the law and no one is beneath it either. He stepped back, and the silence turned into something else. Contemplation. Outside the building, as people spilled into the street, reporters rushed to ask Keanu for a statement. But he said nothing. He simply nodded once and disappeared into the shadows of the alley behind the community center. As he walked alone, away from the noise, away from the lights, his phone buzzed. A message from Angela. They're opening a federal review of Weston Creek PD. It's starting, Keanu. Real change. Maybe for the first time. He stared at the screen, then up at the night sky. Then let's make sure it doesn't stop here. Cliffhanger. Just as he turned the corner toward the motel, a black car pulled up slowly beside him. Tinted windows, no plates. The passenger window rolled down, revealing a man in a suit with sharp eyes. Mr. Reeves, the man said smoothly. Some people don't want this going any further. We should talk. Keanu didn't flinch. Then say what you came to say. The engine purred. The headlights dimmed. Not here. Get in. Keanu looked at the car, then at the empty street behind him, and for the first time in days he hesitated. The meeting in the dark, the street was silent except for the low hum of the car's engine and the distant sound of wind brushing through the trees. Keanu Reeves stood beside the black vehicle, his hands in his jacket pockets, watching the suited man who waited behind the open window. The man's expression didn't change. It was the kind of face that had practiced looking calm, the kind of man who spoke carefully and only when the words served a purpose. Get in, he said again, softly. Keanu didn't move. His eyes scanned the street. There were no witnesses, no cameras. The shadows were long and the air suddenly felt colder. Who are you? Keanu asked, his voice steady. Someone who can help, the man replied, and someone who can hurt, depending on the path you choose. Keanu felt the weight of those words settle over him like dust. He had faced danger before, on screen, in real life. But this felt different. This wasn't about bullets or fists, it was about power, the invisible kind that operated behind closed doors and whispered into the ears of the people pulling strings. After a moment, he walked to the passenger door and opened it. The interior was dark leather, cool to the touch. He sat but left the door cracked slightly open. Always an exit, always a way out. The man didn't start the car. He simply reached into the console and pulled out a folder, sliding it onto Keanu's lap. Before you decide your next move, you should read this. Keanu opened the folder. Inside were photographs, transcripts, and documents. Names, faces, not just from Weston Creek, but from other towns, other cases. Men and women who had been silenced. Whistleblowers who vanished from departments. Lawsuits buried under settlements and non-disclosure agreements. "What is this?" Keanu asked. "Proof," the man said. "Proof that this story goes deeper than a small-town officer making a mistake. This is about culture, control, the system." Keanu flipped through a photo of a young black man named Darius Clark. The note said he was shot during a routine stop 3 years ago. Body, cam footage was never released. The case was closed quietly. The officer was promoted. He looked at another, Rosa Jimenez, a single mother arrested during a protest. Her complaint about excessive force was never filed. She disappeared 2 months later, her family given no answers. Keanu's chest tightened. Each page was a scream on paper. "And you're giving this to me?" he asked. "I'm giving you a choice," the man said. "You can walk away, issue a statement, let the town deal with its own mess, or you can shine a light so bright they can't look away." Keanu closed the folder. "Why me?" the man paused. "Because people listen to you. Because the world believes you're kind. And because you're too honest to keep this hidden." Keanu looked out the window into the darkness. The world outside was quiet, but he knew it was only the eye of the storm. What he held in his hands was a match, and once lit, there'd be no going back. "Who do you work for?" Keanu asked. The man gave a slight smile. "Let's just say I'm not the enemy." Before Keanu could respond, the man handed him a second envelope. Inside is a name. Someone in Weston Creek who's been trying to expose the truth for years. They'll help you if you help them. Keanu took the envelope and stepped out of the car. The man rolled the window up and pulled away, leaving nothing behind but tire marks and questions. Back in the motel room, Keanu sat at the small wooden desk reading every page by the dim lamplight. Hours passed. The sky turned from black to gray. He hadn't slept, but he didn't feel tired. Not anymore. He felt awakened. He opened the second envelope. The name read, Deputy Leah Tanner. Below it was an address and a note. She saw everything. She just stopped talking. Keanu knew what that meant. Someone who once tried to speak out and paid the price. Just after sunrise, he drove to the edge of town. The address led to a small farmhouse surrounded by dry grass and an old fence. A swing set in the yard creaked in the wind, long abandoned. He knocked on the door. After a long pause, it opened. Leah Tanner stood in the doorway, hair tied back, face tired and watchful. Her uniform was gone, replaced with worn jeans and a flannel shirt. But the sharpness in her eyes remained. A survivor's sharpness. "You're really him," she said. "Depends on who you ask," Keanu replied. "Can we talk?" She stepped aside and let him in. The inside of the house was quiet, filled with framed photos and dust. A life once lived with purpose, now tucked away in stillness. They sat at a table in the kitchen. "You used to be a deputy," he said. "I was," she replied. "I made the mistake of trying to report Rick Dalton 3 years ago. Excessive force, racial profiling, all documented. I was told to drop it. When I didn't, they reassigned me. Then they pushed me out. I lost everything." Keanu handed her the folder. "I think they've been doing it to others too." She flipped through the contents, her fingers trembling. "I knew about a few of these," she whispered. "But not this many. They've covered their tracks well." "Help me expose it," Keanu said. "We can go public. Together. No hiding. No edits. Just truth." Leah looked at him, and for the first time in years, hope flickered in her eyes. "They'll come for us," she said. "You know that, right?" Keanu nodded. "Then we stand tall." Just before nightfall, they held a press conference. Not in a studio. Not in front of polished officials, but on the steps of Weston Creek's town hall. Mary streamed it live. Angela stood by with the files in her hands. Keanu and Leah spoke one after the other. About truth, about silence, about the price of standing up. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't shout. They told stories. They named names. And the world listened. News outlets picked it up. Podcasts, influencers, radio hosts, The hashtag changed from Gosh Justice for Keanu to Maj Justice for All. But as the press dispersed and night returned to Weston Creek, Angela received a call. Her face went pale as she listened, then hung up and looked at Keanu. "There's been a break-in. At the city records office," she said. "Files are gone, footage too." Keanu didn't speak. He just looked up at the stars, feeling the storm beginning to move again. Cliffhanger. His phone buzzed. A single text appeared from an unknown number. "They know what you found, get ready." Keanu locked the phone and turned to Leah. "This is bigger than we thought." The fire they couldn't hide. The sun did not rise gently over Weston Creek the next day. It rose with heat and tension, as if even the light knew that something had cracked beneath the surface of this small town. In every coffee shop and on every front porch, people whispered about the press conference the night before. What Keanu Reeves and Leah Tanner had done wasn't just brave, it was seismic. They had spoken names, told truths, and in doing so, had pulled the curtain off a quiet, dangerous pattern that had infected not just a police department, but the soul of a community. But the break-in at the city records building had changed everything. By noon, word had spread that the security footage of Officer Rick Dalton's past arrests had vanished, along with internal complaints, along with files on dismissed reports from the last 10 years. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't just a burglary. It was an erasure, an attempt to cleanse history. Angela Hayes stood inside the now vacant records room, her heels crunching over glass and ash. The flames hadn't spread far before firefighters responded, but the damage had been intentional and precise. File cabinets emptied, hard drives smashed, and no backup in sight. She turned to Keanu, who stood quietly beside her, his eyes locked on the blackened walls. "They wanted this gone," she said softly. "They're scared." Keanu nodded, his voice low. Truth makes cowards panic. Outside the building, reporters gathered like vultures, eager for another quote, another headline. But Keanu wasn't interested in feeding them half-truths or emotions taken out of context. He had something better, something more dangerous. "They think they can destroy the past," Keanu said to Angela, "but they forgot one thing." "What?" "People remember stories." Back at Lucy's diner, Mary sat in the back booth with Leah Tanner and 2 young men, both former junior officers who had quietly left the force years ago. Their names were Adam Briscoe and Malik Cole. Neither had spoken publicly since they resigned, but the fire changed something in them. "I saw Rick pin a kid to the sidewalk for no reason," Malik said. "He was 14. They covered it up, told the mom her son was resisting, threatened to arrest her if she kept pushing." Adam nodded. "They threatened me too. I tried to file a complaint once. My shift changed overnight, and the next week someone slashed my tires." Mary typed every word. "We record this," she said. "You tell your stories, real faces, real voices, no editing, no spin." Leah looked at them, her voice calm but fierce. "You don't have to do this, you could walk away." Malik leaned forward. "And live with what we didn't say?" "Not anymore." Meanwhile, in the sheriff's office, Chief David Dalton sat with his head in his hands. He had once believed that the sins of the department could be contained, that silence would hold, but now, with flames literally licking at the foundation of truth, he realized that silence was the most fragile lie of all. Rick stood across from him, still suspended, but now broken in ways no punishment could fix. He watched his brother, unsure what to say. For the first time, the badge didn't feel like power. It felt like a shackle. "You think this can be fixed?" Rick asked. The chief didn't answer. Instead, he turned to his desk drawer and pulled out a file, a thin one labeled "Confidential Testimony." Rick recognized the handwriting on the cover. "You filed a report?" Rick asked. "The day after you pulled your gun," David said quietly. "I couldn't protect you anymore, not without losing my soul." Rick took a deep breath, then sat down. "Then maybe there's hope for both of us." But outside that small moment of honesty, the forces that didn't want the truth exposed were tightening their grip. In a boardroom downtown, far from Weston Creek, a private meeting was taking place between city attorneys, union leaders, and two men in expensive suits representing interests far above the county line. Reeves has to be discredited, one of them said coldly. Not just for this story, but because if this succeeds, every town like Weston Creek starts digging. He's too clean, the other replied. No scandals, no vices. He's untouchable. Then we manufacture one. They looked at a folder on the table, a private investigator's file, photos taken out of context, names of people from Keanu's past. The narrative changes now, the first man said, or we lose everything. Back in Weston Creek, Keanu met with Angela, Leah, Mary, and the former officers inside an old community theater, one of the few places not under surveillance. They planned to host a live broadcast that night, not through the networks, not through filtered interviews, but through social media straight to the people. We tell the truth, Angela said, from the beginning. We show the timelines, the redacted complaints, the video, the cover-up, the names of people silenced. And we give them faces, Leah added. This isn't just a scandal. This is a pattern. Keanu looked at them. All. People from different walks of life. People once silenced by fear, now standing in defiance. Let's make them listen. As night fell, the town held its breath. Residents gathered around phones, laptops, and living room televisions. The stream went live, and one by one, stories were told. Voices were heard, faces were shown. Malik spoke of the boy on the sidewalk. Adam talked about how complaints vanished. Mary read from old newspaper clippings. Angela broke down the law and how it had failed. And then Keanu spoke. He didn't speak as an actor, or a hero, or a victim. He spoke as a witness, a man who had seen the best and worst of people, who had been judged for his hoodie, who had been called a threat when all he did was sit. They tried to erase the evidence, he said into the camera. But the people are the evidence now, you are the proof, and the truth has a heartbeat that can't be burned. Thousands watched, then millions, and then the attack came. During the stream, the video suddenly froze, then blacked out. Viewers were cut off. Mary scrambled behind her laptop. We're being hacked, but Keanu stood calm. He pulled out his phone and went live directly to his own social media account. They're trying to stop this, he said. Right now. You're watching it happen. This is how scared they are of you hearing the truth. Within moments, the video hit 3 million views, and then, outside the theater, tires screeched. A group of masked men jumped from a black van and began running toward the door. Leah locked it just in time. They're here, she said. They're not going to wait for lawsuits. They're going to silence us the old way. Keanu looked at her, calm but fierce. Then we hold the line. Cliffhanger. Sirens howled in the distance, but not police sirens. Fire trucks. Smoke began, rising from a building just a block away. They're burning the last backup servers, Angela whispered. They're wiping the town clean. Keanu picked up the camera and turned it to his face. They're not just erasing files anymore, he said. They're erasing history. And somewhere, in a room lit only by monitors, a hidden figure leaned forward and said, Time to end, him. The last light in Weston Creek. The night in Weston Creek was unlike any before. Smoke curled through the streets as sirens wailed and buildings glowed faintly with orange flame. It wasn't just the server facility that burned. It was the illusion that this town could keep its secrets buried. In that fire, the truth was finally being dragged, screaming and covered in soot, into the open. Inside the old theater, the walls shook from distant explosions. Mary kept typing through the heat of panic, pushing the last files into an encrypted cloud. Angela barked commands into her headset, coordinating volunteers across the country who were mirroring the live footage Keanu had started from his own account. Leah stood by the door with a crowbar, her fingers white around the handle. Malik and Adam secured the rear exits. Keanu sat alone on the stage, a single spotlight glowing above him, casting his figure in long, quiet shadows. He wasn't afraid. He had walked through fire before. Not the kind that burned skin, but the kind that scorched your soul. And right now, he was ready to walk through it again. He looked into the lens of the camera he held steady and spoke with the same calm clarity that had disarmed a gun, a town, and now a nation. If you're watching this, it means we survived. It means you're still listening. And it means they failed. The video was spreading faster than even his team could track. Mirrored copies appeared on hundreds of independent news sites. Thousands of people uploaded it to their personal feeds. Hashtags exploded into trending charts across the globe. And then came something no one expected. Police officers in other cities, other towns, began sharing their own stories. Anonymous posts turned into signed statements. Body cam footage began leaking. And retired officers, long silenced, stepped forward. The truth had become contagious. But in Weston Creek, the pressure reached its boiling point. As Keanu stepped off the stage, Malik ran into the room, breathless. They're here. 3 black vans. Armed men. Not uniforms. Not cops. Angela paled. Mercenaries? Probably hired to clean house, Malik said grimly. They don't want us walking out of here. Keanu turned to the others. Then we don't run. What? Mary asked. We go out the front, he said calmly, and we bring everyone with us. Every voice, every file, every name. Adam nodded. You sure? Keanu looked each of them in the eye. We started this with truth. We end it the same way. Within minutes, they pushed open the theater doors. Floodlights blinded them for a second. Silhouettes of armed men stood in formation. They had no badges, just weapons and orders. But what they didn't expect, what no one expected, was what happened next. From behind the group, headlights flared. Dozens of trucks, cars, and motorcycles rolled in, forming a barricade between the mercenaries and the theater. Neighbors, farmers, teachers, veterans, strangers, even children on bikes. The people of Weston Creek had risen. The first to step between the armed men and Keanu was Lucy, still in her diner apron holding a frying pan like a shield. You want to get to him, she said firmly. You go through me. One by one, others joined her. Rick Dalton appeared too. Not in uniform, not as a cop, but as a man trying to reclaim something he had lost. He stepped in front of a masked attacker and said, "Put that down. This isn't who we are." The mercenaries hesitated. Then came the sound that broke everything. Helicopters overhead. Federal agents. State troopers. The cavalry had arrived, but not to silence, to protect. A whistleblower from within the police union had sent out an alert. One of Angela's files had landed in the right inbox. An agent in Washington who had lost a brother in a botched cover-up 10 years earlier. He remembered the pain, and he acted. The agents disarmed the attackers. The crowd roared, and Keanu stood silently, breathing it in. Truth had won. Not easily, not without loss, but it had survived. 3 weeks later, Weston Creek looked different. Rick Dalton resigned. He started volunteering at a community center helping troubled youth. Chief David Dalton stepped down but stayed in town, working quietly to rebuild trust. Leah Tanner was reinstated, this time as chief. She swore in 3 new officers on her first day, Malik, Adam, and a local high school graduate who had watched the live stream and decided he wanted to serve the right way. Mary received a national award for investigative reporting. She didn't stop there. She launched a platform for whistleblowers to speak without fear. Angela Hayes was appointed to a state-level civil oversight board. Her first action was pushing for mandatory body cam transparency across every department in the state. And Keanu, he stayed for one last town hall. Not to speak, not to shine, but to sit in the back row as others stood up and told their stories. When it was over, Lucy walked over to him with a plate of pie wrapped in foil. For the road, she smiled. Thanks, Keanu said, standing slowly. For everything. As he left the hall and stepped into the cool evening air, a group of kids ran up. Mr. Reeves, one shouted, and can you sign my hoodie? Keanu laughed softly, pulled out a pen and knelt down. As he signed, another kid asked, Why'd you do all this? You could have left. Keanu looked up, eyes kind and honest. Because silence is the same as permission, he said. And I couldn't stay silent. He stood, waved to the crowd, and walked slowly to his car. He didn't look back. Not because he was done, but because he knew the town would move forward without him now. The spark had become a fire, not of destruction, but of change. Final closing words on screen for the YouTube video. When one man stood still, the world moved forward. Truth isn't loud. It's just impossible to ignore, in memory of all the voices that were never heard.